Imagine waking up one morning. You step outside your shelter. The air is freezing. Snow covers the ground. You look across the valley. And you see something strange. Humans. But not your humans. They look different. They stand differently. They make different tools. They hunt differently. And they keep appearing. More and more of them. You don't know it yet. But your people are disappearing. Not tomorrow. Not next year. But over the next few thousand years. Your species will vanish from the earth. There will be no final battle. No giant war. No moment when someone announces, "The Neanderthals are extinct." Instead, one generation will become fewer. Then another. Then another. Until eventually, there is no one left. So what actually happened to the last Neanderthal? Did Homo sapiens kill them? Did climate change destroy them? Did they simply lose a competition for food? Or did something much stranger happen? Because here's the part that makes the story even more incredible. Neanderthals didn't completely disappear. Part of them, for a long time, popular culture imagined Neanderthals as primitive cavemen. Hunched over. Grunting. Dragging clubs. Barely intelligent. Basically, humans who hadn't figured out how to become human yet. But that's wrong. Neanderthals were human relatives who had survived for hundreds of thousands of years. They lived across Europe and parts of Western Asia. They survived freezing climates. They hunted large animals. They made sophisticated stone tools. They controlled fire. They cared for injured members of their groups. And archaeological evidence suggests they sometimes deliberately buried their dead. They weren't stupid. They weren't simply failing at being human. They were incredibly successful. For an incredibly long time. Neanderthals had already survived dramatic climate changes long before Homo sapiens arrived in Europe. They knew how to live in cold environments. They knew their landscapes. They knew which animals to hunt. They knew where to find shelter. For hundreds of thousands of years, Europe was their world. And then, another human species arrived. Homo sapiens had been evolving in Africa for hundreds of thousands of years. Eventually, some populations began moving beyond Africa. They spread through the Middle East, into Asia, and eventually into Europe. By around 45,000 years ago, modern humans were already present in parts of Europe. Recent evidence from sites such as Bacho Kiro Cave in Bulgaria and Ranis in Germany has pushed our understanding of these early European populations forward. And this creates one of the strangest situations in human history. For a while, there wasn't just one type of human in Europe. There were at least two. Neanderthals and Homo sapiens. Imagine walking across Ice Age Europe. You could spend your entire life believing your people were the only humans on Earth. Is still inside us. Then suddenly, you encounter strangers. They look familiar. But different. They hunt. They make fire. They have families. They bury their dead. They probably look at you and wonder exactly the same thing. Who are these people? Here's where the story gets interesting. If Homo sapiens and Neanderthals met, they didn't simply start a massive war. In fact, we know something much more complicated happened. They had children together. Modern humans outside Africa generally carry around 1 to 2% Neanderthal ancestry, and ancient genomes show that some early modern humans had Neanderthal ancestors only a few generations earlier. That means these encounters weren't always violent. Sometimes, they were intimate. A Neanderthal and a Homo sapiens could meet and somehow form a relationship. A child could be born. That child could grow up And their descendants could continue. Think about what that means. When you look at a modern human today, you are not looking at a species that remained completely separate from Neanderthals. Our history is mixed. Our family tree is messy. And the boundary between Neanderthal and modern human was not as clean as we once imagined. But if they could have children, why did the Neanderthals disappear around 40,000 years ago? Neanderthals disappear from the archaeological record across Europe. Not all at once. Not everywhere on the same day. Different regions show different timelines. Some Neanderthal populations seem to have disappeared earlier. Others survived later. The best evidence suggests there was a period of overlap between Neanderthals and modern humans lasting thousands of years in parts of Europe. One major chronology study estimated a continental overlap of roughly 2,600 to 5,400 years. So forget the image of two armies meeting on a battlefield. This wasn't Neanderthals on one side, Homo sapiens on the other. And then one wins. It was much slower. A population shrinks. Another population expands. Groups move. Climate changes. Food availability changes. People have children. Some people die. Some groups disappear. Some groups merge. And eventually, one population becomes the dominant human population. But why? Scientists have several possibilities. And the answer may be all of them is still inside us. First, climate. Around the time Neanderthals disappeared, Europe was experiencing dramatic environmental instability. Ice Age Europe wasn't simply cold. It could change rapidly. A landscape that had supported one ecosystem could transform. Forests could shrink. Grasslands could expand. Animals could move. And the humans who depended on those animals had to move too. Some regions show evidence that Neanderthal populations retreated or disappeared during harsh environmental changes. For example, research in central Spain has linked Neanderthal abandonment of some interior areas around 42,000 years ago with particularly hostile environmental conditions. But there's a problem. Neanderthals had already survived cold climates. They weren't strangers to Ice Age Europe. So climate alone probably doesn't explain everything. In fact, modern humans were also entering Europe during extremely cold conditions. At the Ilsenhol site in Germany, evidence indicates Homo sapiens were present around 45,000 years ago during a particularly cold phase. So the question becomes, if both species experienced the same climate, why did one survive? Maybe Homo sapiens were simply better competitors. Not necessarily stronger. Not necessarily smarter. But perhaps better at surviving in large, connected social networks. Imagine two groups trying to survive in the same harsh environment. One group has 10 people. The other has 50. If one hunter gets injured, the larger network might be able to help. If food disappears in one area, someone might know about another area. If one group meets another group, they might exchange tools, information, food, or mates. The bigger your social network, the more information can move through it. And information can be incredibly valuable when the environment is changing. But we have to be careful here. We cannot simply say, Homo sapiens were smarter. That's an oversimplification. Neanderthals were capable toolmakers and had their own sophisticated behaviors. And new genetic evidence from late Neanderthals in Belgium and France has challenged another popular explanation, that Neanderthals were simply suffering from extreme inbreeding and genetic collapse. A 2026 Nature study of 27 Neanderthals found evidence that some late northwestern European Neanderthal populations were genetically diverse and relatively well connected. The researchers found no sign that accumulating genetic load was the main driver of their disappearance. So, Maybe they weren't genetically doomed, but population size may still have mattered. Not necessarily because every Neanderthal was unhealthy, but because there simply weren't enough of them. Imagine a village of 30 people. Now imagine another population spread across a huge region with thousands of people. The larger population has more opportunities for new ideas, more potential mates, more children, more hunters, more people who can survive disasters. So, what happened to the last Neanderthal? We don't know exactly. Maybe they died in a cold valley. Maybe they belonged to one of the final small communities. Maybe their descendants eventually merged into expanding Homo sapiens populations. Maybe different things happened to different Neanderthal groups. What we do know is that around 40,000 years ago, Neanderthals disappeared as a distinct population from the archaeological record. But their story didn't end there. Because extinction isn't always as simple as disappearing. Sometimes, a species can vanish from the world, while leaving pieces of itself behind. A piece in the bones buried beneath the ground. A piece in ancient DNA. And even a tiny piece inside people alive today. The Neanderthals may be gone, but they were never completely erased. Because somewhere inside the human story, they're still here. And perhaps that's the strangest ending of all. Not that the last Neanderthal disappeared, but that after 40,000 years, part of them survived. They know which plants can be eaten. They know where water can be found. To them, this isn't the end of a species. It's just life. They have no idea that thousands of years later, scientists will dig through the ground looking for traces of them. They don't know that their bones will become museum specimens. They don't know that their DNA will become one of the biggest scientific discoveries in human history. They just know that winter is coming. And they need food. Then the population gets smaller. Maybe a hunting party doesn't return. Maybe several children don't survive. Maybe animals move somewhere else. Maybe another human population occupies nearby territory. Maybe climate conditions become unfavorable. Maybe some Neanderthals join Homo sapiens communities. Maybe all of these things happen at different times in different places. This is why scientists still debate the exact cause. The evidence doesn't point neatly to one villain. There is no single bullet. No confirmed massacre. No single disease. No simple moment of extinction. Instead, there was a complicated transition. Neanderthals disappeared as a distinct population, while Homo sapiens continued expanding. And eventually, the archaeological record becomes overwhelmingly ours, but here's what makes the story almost impossible to call a complete extinction. If you have ancestors from populations outside Africa, there is a good chance that some tiny part of your genome came from Neanderthals. Their species disappeared, but their genetic legacy survived. Their biology survived. Their descendants survived. Their story survived. And in a strange way, every person carrying Neanderthal ancestry is evidence that those encounters happened. Somewhere in the deep past, a modern human and a Neanderthal met. They had a child. And that child's descendants kept going. Through thousands of generations. Through ice ages. Through migrations. Through civilizations. Until eventually, they became us. So, what happened to the last Neanderthal? We don't know exactly. Maybe they died in a cold valley. Maybe they belonged to one of the final small communities. Maybe their descendants eventually merged into expanding Homo sapiens populations. Maybe different things happened to different Neanderthal groups. What we do know is that around 40,000 years ago, Neanderthals disappeared as a distinct population from the archaeological record. But their story didn't end there. Because extinction isn't always as simple as disappearing. Sometimes, a species can vanish from the world, while leaving pieces of itself behind. A piece in the bones buried beneath the ground. A piece in ancient DNA. And even a tiny piece inside people alive today. The Neanderthals may be gone, but they were never completely erased. Because somewhere inside the human story, they're still here. And perhaps that's the strangest ending of all. Not that the last Neanderthal disappeared, but that after 40,000 years, part of them survived.